Artemisia Gentileschi was a Baroque painter during the beginning to mid-17th century. Though Baroque was dominated by male artists, Gentileschi stands out among her contemporaries by introducing a feminist perspective. When analyzing her artwork, how do Gentileschi's paintings reflect feminist values in a time of patriarchy and gender disparity? Artemisia Gentileschi, born on July 8, 1593, in Rome, Italy, was the daughter of well-known painter Orazio Gentileschi and Prudentia Monotone Gentileschi. Eldest of 5 children, she quickly showed an aptitude for art, following in the steps of her father. From an early age, Orazio began training her as an artist, introducing her to a circle of painters in Rome, including Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio. At the time, Caravaggio was popularizing the Baroque style, well known for its theatrical expressions and striking use of chiaroscuro. Orazio soon adopted the Baroque style himself as he began practicing it in his studio along with Gentileschi. Other than being an apprentice to her father, Gentileschi had little proper training and not learning to read and write until she was an adult. Moreover, it was never Orazio's intention for her to become a professional painter, since he tried to coerce her into the nunnery instead. His attempts, however, failed as she remained in the painting studio and improved more and more each day. Orazio finally accepted Gentileschi's wishes to become an artist and wrote that, "She became so skilled that I can venture to say that today she has no peer." In 1610, Gentileschi painted Susanna and the Elders, one of her first known works of the famous biblical story. The painting depicts Susanna bathing when 2 elders approach her and proposition her. Although a commonly portrayed story, Gentileschi's portrayal stands out as it offers a distinctive approach. Rather than eroticizing Susanna's vulnerability, she depicts her aggression and extreme discomfort that other male artists neglect to consider. Works such as this demonstrate Gentileschi's skill in portraying realistic facial expressions and reactions, as well as her ability to frame the narrative from the female perspective. Attention soon moved away from her art and toward her morality instead, after she was raped by her painting instructor, Agostino Tassi. The publicity of the court case tarnished her reputation as both an honorable woman and as an artist. After a controversial and torturous trial, the judge sentenced Tassi to 5 years in prison, a sentence that was never carried out. The ruling nonetheless managed to preserve Gentileschi's image, as she soon married a man named Pier Antonio Siatesi, a marriage which further secured her profession as a painter. Gentileschi then moved to Florence to set up her own studio and resume her artistic career. Many of the paintings that followed showcased powerful female figures, usually partaking in bloody acts, either from biblical or mythological stories. Her mastery of the arts would lend her to be the first woman to be accepted into the prestigious Accademia del Disegno. This honor granted her freedom, as it would allow her to purchase paint supplies without her husband's approval, travel, and even sign her own contracts. She would later go on to separate from her husband and work independently in Naples while supporting her 2 daughters. Despite her successes, she still had to fight for validity and fair pay. In one of her letters to her patron Don Antonio Ruffo, she accused him of being sexist, declaring, "And now I'll show your most illustrious lordship what a woman can do." After her death, her legacy and artistic work fell from the historical records of her period. It was not until the early 1900s when scholar Roberto Longhi published an article on her that her artwork soon began to resurface. Longhi's wife, Anna Banti, wrote a popular novel entitled Artemisia, which focuses on Gentileschi's rape, overshadowing her artistic talents. Debate over whether or not Gentileschi's sexual assault should be accounted for in assessing her artwork remains a subject of discourse. Gentileschi's artistic achievements are unparalleled, as she remains a resilient female artist who fought for recognition in a male-dominated industry. She uses her artwork to specifically and intentionally promote powerful images of female heroines, emphasizing strength and courage when most women were not permitted to stand out. Her place in history, however, is somewhat marred by the popular focus upon her rape at the hand of Tassi, an act which cannot be considered to be responsible for the individuality and dexterity of her work. Gentileschi's ability to accurately convey the female perspective in an empowering and compelling way speaks louder than words, as her artwork remains emblematic of her time. In 1628, Gentileschi painted yet another story with a strong female lead, entitled Esther before Ahasuerus. The story of Esther describes the moment in which she goes before her husband, King Ahasuerus, to bravely intercede on behalf of the Jewish people, causing her to faint at his anger in the process. In her version of the work, Gentileschi limits her composition to just 4 figures: Esther, 2 ladies, and King Ahasuerus. Esther on the left side of the painting is shown fainting before the king, supported by 2 ladies. Ahasuerus is shown from his throne about to reach for his queen. The focus on just a few people is a theme seen throughout her work, and is a device which helps bring the viewer into the composition, allowing them a close connection with the story that they would otherwise not get. This figural choice contrasts with of Tintoretto's version of Esther before Ahasuerus, made in 1546. In his version of the work, the fainting Esther and King Ahasuerus are surrounded by a plethora of other figures, so much so that we almost lose sight of Esther in the mob of people. The way Tintoretto depicts Esther's story seems to draw more attention to the story as a whole, and not just Esther's sacrifice. It is as if he tried to include every element of the story he could, leaving nothing out. Note the boy with a dog on the bottom left of Tintoretto's painting. This is a traditional aspect to include in a depiction of Esther and Ahasuerus, and yet it is not found in Gentileschi's version. In fact, she had originally included the boy and the dog in her painting just below the king's knee. However, she later painted over the figures, eliminating them from the image. We can suppose that this decision was made to declutter the image and draw more attention to the story's main players. In contrast to Tintoretto, Gentileschi's more intimate depiction of the story draws much more attention to the figure of Esther. Painted her as a large dominating figure in a bright yellow dress in full view at the very front of the composition. She is not lost to the eyes as she is in Tintoretto's version. This is a very deliberate act on Gentileschi's part to draw the viewer's attention to the brave actions of Esther, our female heroine. Gentileschi's use of few people also gives the composition a theatrical aspect, as if they are players set on a stage. The theatrical element is emphasized by their clothing, especially that of Ahasuerus. In other paintings such as Tintoretto's, Ahasuerus is often shown sitting upon an elevated throne, dressed in extreme royal finery. However, as noted by Keith Christensen at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Gentileschi has depicted Ahasuerus as foppishly dressed, wearing an extravagantly feathered hat and crown, slashed sleeves, and fur-trimmed jeweled boots. Ahasuerus' outfit is similar to those worn on stage, and is often associated with a comedic character. Theatrical and essentially comedic treatment of Ahasuerus in the painting effectively emphasizes Esther's superiority. Unlike Tintoretto's version, Gentileschi has placed the figure of Esther nearly at the same height as Ahasuerus, putting them on the same level, both physically and metaphorically. Every choice Gentileschi made for this composition seems to have been done to emphasize the importance of Esther's role, both in the story and in history. While she may not necessarily be a heroine per se, Bathsheba is another significant biblical character that Gentileschi as well as other artists have chosen to depict in her piece, David and Bathsheba. She plays a significant role in the story of King David, known for being gazed upon by King David while she bathes as he stands on his balcony. Gentileschi painted her take on the story in 1636, finishing in 1637. In this painting, we see Bathsheba prominently displayed in the center of the panel, attended to by 3 servants. David is seen in the background of the work, a small figure in the distance placed on the left-hand side of the composition. What is perhaps most notable about this particular work is the apparent modesty Bathsheba demonstrates. While she may not necessarily be aware of David's voyeuristic gaze from the balcony, she seems to actively be turning away from him. Her left arm covers her chest, further reducing any unnecessary objectification that could be imbued into the work. We see a very different story, however, when we examine the work of the same name by French artist Louis-Jean Francois Lagrenay. Here we see a playful look on Bathsheba's face and no attempt at modesty. David is still similarly placed in the background, but it is not as clearly placed in shadow as in Gentileschi's work. Stylistically, Lagrenay's work appears more in the Rococo than the Baroque, further distancing itself from Gentileschi. Between these two works, there is a clear contrast being made in terms of how the artist displays the nature of Bathsheba. Gentileschi, the feminist, shows Bathsheba as a much more firm character than Lagrenay. Her expression breathes exasperation, and she does not flaunt the fact that she is in the act of bathing. Lagrenay presents a more playful Bathsheba, and though this painting does come from a slightly different era, it is still a man depicting the exact same story in a completely different manner. The story of Bathsheba is one of a woman essentially being taken advantage of by a man in a position of power, and Gentileschi properly shows how a woman would realistically respond to this. In the oil painting, Judith and her maidservant, Artemisia, Gentileschi highlights the strength and bravery of the two women. The light source coming from the candle shines directly on Judith and her maidservant, marking them as the focus of the image. Specifically, the light shines on Judith's left hand and right arm, which have both committed the act of murdering, Holofernes. Also illuminated by the candle are Judith and the maidservant's faces. Both women are facing in the same direction, with Judith's hand facing the same way, indicating that a threat is approaching. Even in the presence of this threat, the women's faces do not show any sign of fear or surrender. With direct gaze and serious expressions, they are ready for what is to come. Gentileschi also depicts movement in the painting. Judith's arm is swinging the sword while her other hand is raised in opposition. Beside her, her maidservant is actively hiding away the head. This movement demonstrates a sense of action as they are slyly making their escape. Conversely, Orazio Gentileschi's depiction of Judith and her maidservant with the head of Holofernes depicts the woman in a less heroic light. Judith and her maidservant are huddled next to each other, with their bodies positioned inward and their faces looking outward. It is as though a threat is approaching from both sides, trapping them in their place. Furthermore, their faces show concern and apprehension. For instance, Judith's lips are pursed and her eyes are looking upward fearfully. While Gentileschi depicts the two women as courageous and empowered, Orazio portrays the women as being fearful and helpless. Also, in Gentileschi's painting, Judith is strongly gripping the sword, in contrast to Orazio's painting where she loosely holds it. This is representative of the difference in control and power between the two Judiths. Furthermore, unlike Gentileschi's painting, which has a sense of movement, Orazio depicts the figures as still, further emphasizing their confinement. The difference in the depiction of the female figures reflects the artist's own views on women, as well as their experiences in society. Regretfully, historians often choose to focus upon a certain event that occurred early in Artemisia Gentileschi's life and attempt to attribute the brilliance of her art to the trauma of this incident. The emotional impact left behind her rape, however, should not be considered the primary factor which imbued her artwork with its feminist elements. Some of Artemisia's early works already displayed feminist values prior to this attack, including Susanna and the Elders. While her rape was briefly addressed earlier, an attempt was made to diminish its significance, instead looking only at Gentileschi's merits. Choosing to focus your attention upon this act and how it may have affected her art pulled attention away from her capabilities. This is a double standard, because a male artist would never have the private details of his life examined as closely. A tragedy occurred in Artemisia Gentileschi's life, and this tragedy should be viewed as a footnote in her history, rather than the header that many seem to believe it to be. Gentileschi displays strong feminist themes, especially when one compares her work to that of male artists of her time, making her worthy of an iconic position in the Baroque art.